Okay, my name is Maya. I will be moderating your panel today, and the panel is called Living Technologies, Renewable Futures. We are here in Riga, and all of us are kind of connected from abroad. We just listened to a panel about living technologies from different perspectives. So I'm uncertain if you joined in that panel, but in my mind, it's a perfect continuation of that. I also saw that a lot of you are coming from the fields of design. So I'm also looking forward to hearing more practical approaches to living technologies. And our first presentation will be by Eva and Dieter. Eva is both are senior researchers at the Art Academy of Latvia, and Eva received her PhD from the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna, and her research subjects are related to spatiality and the human body. Her practice includes writing, curating, and developing experimental digital spaces. It's a very, very trendy combination of words that I hope you can also comment a bit more. And Dietmar received his doctoral degree in engineering from the Technical University of Berlin, and his current research is focusing on the field of architectural design and is concerning the relationships between humans and machines, ethics and space in the age of artificial intelligence. So the presentation is Vessels for New Digital Landscapes. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Maya, for this kind introduction. So yeah, as you said, we're Eva and Dietmar. And yeah, thank you a lot for the opportunity to be able to speak here today. And I'll just start. To co-live with algorithms and living environments. Sorry, I just forgot. Of course, I need to first share the screen. Sorry about that. So now we can start properly. I'll start again. To co-live with algorithms and living environments requires new conceptual models of space. New models that transgress binary oppositions, able to reflect the multi-layered and interconnected coexistence of the digital and the physical, as well as the living and non-living beyond their distinction. We argue in line with philosopher Bernard Stiegler's thesis that technology has always affected the transformation and social structure of societies.
Without a doubt, it can be said that in digital society, the human body and its senses are complemented by data and how this data is processed on the basis of algorithms. Phones and computers extend the physical body in the form of digital prostheses that also function on the basis of algorithms and network in real time with other algorithms. In fact, these prostheses communicate in ways that can only be understood by computer scientists and programmers. Still, human behavior tends to adapt to the ways of communication put forward by these prostheses, as adaptation, of course, is a core human ability. Although the majority of users do not understand these prostheses conversations, they are nevertheless employed on a daily basis and shape everyday perceived realities. Although here we do not want to explain the concept of reality or realities, but that of locality, the place in which our data actually is and how it travels, and ultimately the space it generates, argued from an architectural perspective. We are looking for new architectural models to create new terrain beyond binary oppositions, reflecting these new digital landscapes.
To leave behind binary divisions and notions of unchangeable pre-existing container space, the theories of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari prove fruitful. Their conception of the world does not emerge from the subject, but processes of subjectivation emerge from the interaction between body and world. In Plateau 1440 of the 1000 Plateaus publication, they coined a small number of so-called models, fluctuating processes subject to change. The model of the sea, for example, constantly goes back and forth from a process of territorialization. The vast extents of the ocean are mapped so they might be navigated and controlled, to a process of deterritorialization. A submarine may bypass the geographic and political order on the surface. The water metaphor, to be found in the terms of data streams and practices of navigating or surfing the internet, reminds us that the rules learned from human life on earthly grounds no longer apply to the post-human world of data. Instead, humans need architecture, such as a boat or a digital device, to navigate the flying cosmos. In search of a conception of avatar navigation, interestingly, non-Western representations can serve well. Conceptual models of Polynesian navigation create an animated world of flux around the traveler. During a journey, the moving canoe is the fixed point of reference, while the islands, flock of birds and fish, currents, winds, and the like pass by the boat along the itinerary. A map that Polynesian star navigator Tupaia drew together with James Cook's scientific crew aboard the Endeavour mission in the late 18th century, Cook's first voyage across the Southern Pacific, reveals the discrepancy between Western and Polynesian notions of imagining and drawing space. A sheer unbridgeable gap lies between them. Simply put, the map exhibits a misunderstanding. Tupaia was able to adopt Western mapping conventions and translated his knowledge of approximately 70 Polynesian islands into the map. They drew together using an ingenious mapping method he made up from scratch. Yet, his mapping method was not understood by the Europeans at that time, only to be decoded in 2019 by scientists Lars Eckstein and Anja Schwarz. For a more detailed description of the different ways of imagining the world involved in the drawing process of Tupaia's map, please refer to my recent free ebook, Tupaia, Kubernetes, and Lara Croft, Bodily Perspectives on Post-Digital Spaces, that was published in 2022. Having drafted a copy of Tupaia's map, Enlightenment researcher Georg Förster wrote in 1777, "If his drawing had been exact, our ships must have sailed over a number of these islands which he had set down." Not able to understand a different way of looking at the world, i.e. a form of cartography incompatible with his own, Förster continues, accusing Tupaia of pretension. It is therefore very probable that the vanity of appearing more intelligent than he really was had prompted him to produce this fancy chart of the South Sea, and perhaps to invent many of the names of islands in it, quote end. It seems as if it's especially difficult for Western minds to unlearn the logic of geographic mapping, in which anything that exists is located within the coordinates given per Cartesian space, such as the map you see here on the screen. It displays Tupaia's islands in a redrawn Mercator projection that we are trained to read and understand. In the oceanic model of the world, though, the location of an island is not fixed within an a priori grid of longitudes and latitudes set after the cardinal directions of north, south, east, and west. Even the concept of such a fixed location does not exist. It does not matter. What matters is the itinerary from one stop to the next. Itineraries are remembered from a mobile position from within, from a moving storyteller's perspective.
Many of these oceanic world model qualities apply to the body when it communicates or resides in the digital medium, say computer games that use avatars or mixed reality experiences. The body is fixed while the digital architecture moves in the flow. Interestingly, also in the 1990s, architectural practitioners and theorists have speculated on inverting the only seemingly fixed relationship between static pre-existing space and its mobile observers within, as Lars Polberg's note in Motor Geometry, in which the moving observer is a point of reference generating space. In the freshwater pavilion from 1997, built by Knox, Polberg attempted to materialize some of these aspects with the scope of a built structure. This building does not feature walls or floor. Its composition does not follow the given logic set up by X, Y, and Z axes. Instead, walking and falling become confused, as Polberg writes, dwelling on a concept in which topology precedes geometry. Orientation is not meant to give externally, but purposefully results from the bodily interaction with the pavilion that affords the visitor body multiple ways of occupation. In our research, we are looking for a new architectural spatial narrative inspired by this inversion of what is fixed against what is stable and the need to use a vessel or a device to cope with and counteract the demands made by the unpredictable digital flow and to contribute another partial perspective to non-binary theory of new digital landscapes.
In order to look into the world spun by data, algorithms, and questions of locality, we will make use of speculative fabulation. Speculative fabulation, according to Donna Haraway, draws a lot from the narration of everyday experiences and from the notion of the fable. It is an alternative to master histories and normative historiography that transparently gives away by whom and from what positioning a story is constructed, a stance that Haraway refers to as situatedness. Speculative fabulation, in her own words, is a mode of attention, a theory of history. Speculative fabulation brings alternative aspects to the fore, insofar as it is a practice that puts the finger at biases that shape our perceptions by breaking with familiar modes of understanding. Speculative fabulations are narratives. Still, this does not imply they are in conflict with scientific facts. The construction of new theory actually does require using fiction to a certain degree, as it is a practice of imagining something that differs from the already known. Therefore, it is worth taking a look again at a story about the island of Rapa Iti, the most southern island, according to Western understanding, of the ones drawn onto Tupaya's map, located at the very end of an itinerary narrated by him.
Rapa Iti, too, is one of the 50 islands described in the book Atlas of Remote Islands by Judith Shalansky. It is a story, the sources one can find about are thin on the ground, that is as incredible as it is romantic, far-fetched, strange, and yet perhaps possible, somewhere in the intermediate realm between real life on the mainland and the uncertainty of the oceanic islands. Interestingly, the island of Rapa Iti, which is part of the Austral Islands in French Polynesia, plays a role of the link to an unknown language in Shalansky's story, the unknown algorithm, in our opinion. The island Rapa Iti is enmeshed in a story we will spin about understanding and misunderstanding, a story on a kind of navigation that is commonplace in the virtual world, but has no model of reference in the physical Western world, and therefore seems so difficult to be conceptualized. In the context of the island of Rapa Iti, Shalansky tells the story of Magliplin, a man who learned an unknown language in his dreams as a child. Scientists become aware of this lonely, peculiar character and want to decode and translate this language with the help of calculating machines, or say early computers, but this does not work. Eventually, a man in a French harbor bar recognizes the language and brings Magliplin together with a Polynesian woman, Mirituini Make, who speaks the common language Rapa from the Rapa Iti, the loneliest of all Polynesian islands, as Shalansky puts it. In 1983, Magliplin marries Mirituini Make and moves with her to Rapa Iti. Magliplin dies on the island on the 26th of May 1998 at the age of 50, his death marking the end of Shalansky's Rapa Iti tale. Magliplin actually existed. To what extent Shalansky invented the detail of the story can only be speculated on. And this is where we would like to tie in with our part of the story. We are not trying to find proof or falsify Libin's case of xenoglossia, the parapsychological phenomenon that makes individuals speak languages foreign to them. What is interesting is not that Mark Lippin communicated in a language that no one in his immediate environment understood, but the role played by his future wife Mirituni Marke. She is the enigma of communication of the old rapper, of her native rapper Iti, of deciphering what Mark Lippin says. So the act of decoding the formerly misunderstood becomes possible.
New questions arise. What if we suddenly understood the algorithms that have become part and have influenced our reality? Would we improve them, adapt our lives, or even change them completely? What would be revealed to us? It is clear that these questions can only be solved through communication with and participation in our post-digital environment. It is equally important to examine the possibilities various algorithms already possess to adaptively influence our environments. In conclusion, the conversations to be investigated lie not in the relationship between humans and machines, but rather in the information of the algorithms that in turn inform us. So in the end, it is about conversations between humans and algorithms and their impact on the ways we see the world. As Dietmar also argues in a forthcoming Enacting Cybernetics Open Access Journal publication titled Ethics, Human Beings and AI, a friendly dispute about the coexistence between humans, trivial machines, AI, and von Förster's briefing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing this story. I really liked looking at the maps. It's something about old maps seems so fascinating. But is this part of a bigger research, or this the story was something you're working on in a theoretical part, or is it going to become also something practical?
I would say it's part of a process, because initially it was part of my so-called B-sides of my dissertation, because I had a lot of chapters that did not make it ultimately into like the finished version of the PhD. But then I thought like some of these chapters are so interesting, and then like these were the ones that were then put together for this other publication that I was mentioning. But then like every time one thinks about especially this map of Tobias, every time one thinks about it from a different point of view, it also transforms. So I would say it can also become something else, and eventually like some ideas that that actually are in the map, so maybe not the map itself, but like this idea of navigation that really puts the traveler in the center and that thinks of the traveler as something static, whereas like even islands, so things that we Western thinkers would refer to as static, like they become fluent. So there's this sort of strange correlation with avatar navigation, and yeah, also the ways in which one interacts maybe with mixed reality settings. So this is definitely something that Dietmar and I are continuing to look into. So there's also maybe you would like to maybe point at the installation that we're
I mean, the idea was probably also as if I mentioned already, how we as human beings maybe use a digital space without a kind of navigation based on Western traditions. There's no south, east, and west really. So the only locality in the digital space so far is quite given by the end of the domain, like, in this case, LB or the Palau or the islands, depends where the servers are. And then there was, of course, the idea how we bridge this idea to architecture which exists, and therefore the flow of water. And this was the idea match of the pavilion of Knox at that time in '97, which, I mean, today totally transformed into a museum for whales. I mean, it's still there. I mean, that's great, but the technical interaction is not working anymore. And we use this as a starting point, of course, with the idea what Eva also mentioned about Donna Haraway and this speculative fabulation, to tell a certain story to create consciousness, which will materialize in a conference set up us in November at the Art Academy of Riga. So this is a start. We will work further on it, and the paper is going to be published probably in January, but in between there's a physical installation with animation and stuff. So yeah, it's a continuous flow, I would say.
No, it's excellent work, and I think I made a note. I will go download your your article, and thank you for sharing this. And
my article is not yet published; it's still in press. But you can, you know, download or probably order the book by Eva. Or
yes, that's
that's for free. You can download it.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing your research and your process. And
welcome.
And we will.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Do we have maybe questions that someone wants to ask from the audience? If not, then let's move to the next presenter. Mike, you're still here. So I will quickly introduce you, and then you can start preparing your screen sharing. So Mike is a design researcher who focuses on designing temporal ecologies, the materiality of the internet, and artificial nature. And today, Mike will offer us her presentation, Technology as an Ecosystem Actor. I'm always amazed that people use this actor as a term, because in Latvian we don't actually use it that often. And there is a literal translation, and we can also say actors, but as a symbol, as a word in English, it's such a perfect description of what it is. So I'm looking forward to your presentation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much also for introducing me. I need to look at this for a second because I want to share my screen here. I hope this will work. Let me see. So there. Yes, that works. Okay, perfect. And now I need to go here. Okay. So yes, as you mentioned, I'm a designer and researcher, also in the field of more than human speculation, as I like to say. And I study product design, and in my master course, I studied a master's which is about social ecological transformation for sustainable futures, where I did my master project, which I want to share with you today. So when I read the title of this conference, I wondered at first if Splintered Realities describes the current reality, which is splintered by our global challenges, or if it describes the future scenarios, which will be shown by the speakers today. I decided for myself that it applies to both the future and the present. And I'm very curious about how or if your definition changes during this conference, and maybe we can talk about it later as well. So, but for now, I want to tell you why I think we're living in a splintered reality right now. So as we saw in the topic from yesterday, in our society, the origins of natural and cultural entities are seen as separate elements. In our session, Beyond Green, we can wonder what green or the natural actually is about. So if you don't mind, I would wonder myself what you think is natural. So if you could just intuitively type in one word, what is natural for you? That would be very interesting for me. So maybe that would work. Just 1 second typing. Anything? No, we can do it together.
It's my own research is about this describing what is natural and what is nature
Oh,
for
nice.
for a human living in a city, not in a kind of farm. But so for me, this separation of natural and cultural is such an interesting topic.
What would
I,
your word be?
I don't even know if I have a word. But my research is mainly focusing on food.
Ah, okay.
So for me, just the Beyond Green and all my future and all my research is focused on this human animal that constantly wants to eat and wants to eat what it wants to eat, not
nice.
not the local seasonal things.
Okay, perfect. So that's also very good perspective. I have another one for my master thesis. So, and if the other ones find a word in the head during the talk, just type it in the chat. I would be very interested to see it afterwards. So for me personally, everything is natural because everything we use consists of natural elements. For example, the embodiment of screens we are looking at, or in my case, my laptop and my tablet, came at one point from nature. All of these elements are based on natural material like minerals, like copper, oils, or rare earth. So the extraction of the material for the embodiment of technology and also the use of some technologies have a strong negative impact on nature. That's why I focused in my master thesis on one specific question, which is how can we use the potential of technology to have a positive impact on nature and to help tackle the consequences of climate change. The philosophical anthropologist, difficult word, and philosopher of technology, Oliver Müller, says, the reason for the emergence of technology is the possibility of understanding the world. And if we are taking a look at sciences, there are quite a few options to use technology for something good. So, for example, biotechnology, such as global ecology, we learned about the planetary importance of the forest and also the brilliantness of the forest ecosystem itself. We learned to slightly understand as well the communication system of the forest ecosystem by laboratory research. So symbioses or collaborating species interact through chemical substances, so-called volatile organic compounds in the forest. The symbiosis between the tree and the mycorrhiza fungus, which is the most important in this ecosystem, is also based on these chemical substances. The forest biodiversity relies on this symbiosis between the mycorrhiza and the trees, as the tree uses the fungal network to transfer nutrients and warning signals between the individual trees. So due to climate change and toxic substances, for example, from agriculture or industry, the symbioses are breaking more and more apart. Which is why the forest ecosystem is suffering under our industrial behavior. So since we as humans interfere too intensively with this ecosystem, scientists say that the forest will not be able to regenerate by itself in our lifetime without a huge loss of currently living species and biodiversity. So in my master project, I used the potential of technology to build a temporary bridge for the regenerative capacity of the forest ecosystem. So my speculative approach for master thesis is FORSI-A. What does that mean? So FORSI-A is the forest symbiotic agent and is an artificial intelligence that learns the forest's own language by the chemical components and takes over the functions of signal transmission until the symbiosis between mycorrhiza and the tree is strengthened again. So that's how it looks. That's the interface of the artificial intelligence. And how does it work? FOSI-A tracks the meteorological and historical data of endangered forest areas through satellite monitoring, sensing, and modeling techniques. This is everything you can see on the left side and on the bottom side. And once extreme weather conditions are forecasted for this specific forest area, FOSI-A analyzes the forest air components for chemical compounds emitted by threatened trees. This is what you can see here on the right side. There's also a small video. So let me just start it. Yeah, as an agent-based learning algorithm, FOSI-A learns to understand the signals of trees in correlation with weather patterns and sensing data. If an attack of a herbivore, for instance, is detected, FOSI-A uses the data of the air components and instructs the chemical laboratory to produce the chemical substance of the natural defense mechanism. Drones then will spray the substance in the endangered forest ecosystem to let the distant trees naturally pre-immunize. Immunize, yes, that's the word. So the ecosystem communication is thereby bridged by FOSI-A, which is supporting the forest until the natural communication network is strengthened again. So it is made to help the forest ecosystem thriving again. But we can only wonder how nature would really react to this new communication actor. So imagine if nature could at some point get so used to the new actor that trees start to use technology for their own purpose. So if artificial intelligence, this or another artificial intelligence enters the cycle of the ecosystem as an accepted organism, new symbiosis could be established as well. Like as humans, some other species could benefit from the new technology. So in their own way, FOSI-A and the forest ecosystem ultimately pursue the goal of strengthening the regenerative power of the forest. And even the inclusion of humans for this goal of nature regeneration is imaginable via the connectedness of the internet. So would that be the second splintered reality? And would that be a better one or a worse one than we're living in now? That's what you can decide for yourself. So with the speculation about FOSI-A and its potential consequences, I wanted to open up the discussion of the endangered engagement between nature and technology. And after presenting you this project, which I'm very thankful for, thanks for this opportunity, I want to ask you only one last question, having in mind that all material for the technological embodiment comes from nature. Does nature have the same right to use the almost unlimited possibilities of technology as we have? So thank you. And feel free to share your thoughts about this question and about the project. And I'm also happy to answer other questions as well. So thanks a lot.
Thank you for your presentation. It's a bit of a romantic view on the technology.
Is it a question?
Yeah, no, it's like the beginning of a question.
Yeah. Yes, so I think it's both. It at one point I think it shows how it could be romanticized, but at some point while looking at it, like while looking at this presentation, I also feel myself that you have kind of a negative feeling that's coming into your into your mind, into your body, that is like, is that a good idea? to do this? And that's what I want to achieve, just this like stormy feeling inside of you that you're trying to reflect for yourself. Should we really interfere so much with technology in nature? And not just this idea, which is definitely speculative, but also should we interfere with I forgot the word in English, but to grow plants in laboratories or stuff. So that's also a kind of technology which has already been used, and that's also a thing that you can reflect on with this feeling. So that's what I want to achieve.
It's always such an interesting idea of humans, that humans think that technology can solve all problems, and then we create more technologies, we use more resources to, and we also have to use resources to sustain those technologies. So it kind of goes into this loop that's kind of endless and unforeseen end. And if there is even such a thing as end to this loop, because in my research, I always try to kind of limit the technologies that are not do-it-yourself technologies, because this black box technology that we don't understand anymore, that's what I see is not sustainable. Because if I can't prepare it for myself, like I can't make it myself, then I have to rely on the society to support me constantly, and then it becomes dangerous. So I really like your question. If the nature has the right to use the technology, and you're asking it in a way, if the nature has a choice, like so. To me, that was a very interesting wording of the question.
Yeah, thanks. That's what I wanted to like. I think it's very, very good that you heard this kind of wording, because I think when you start thinking about that everything is natural, then and we came from nature as well, so we're just some animals before, so could other animals also become the same or get into the same development with technology? So it's all kind of very far imaginable in a way, if you want to think about it, and then you start reflecting it on humans, because we are also just natural species, and then is it allowed for us to use this if it isn't is for trees or bugs or whatever? So it's I think in the end it's just raising questions. And what you said about that there's an endless loop of technologies dealing with the problems of the technology before, and that you always need even more material, and then the world gets more destroyed and more destroyed. That's also very, very interesting part, I think.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. If there are questions from the audience, this is the time to ask them. If not, then I will say thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this possibility. It's really a great conference. Really enjoy being here.
Excellent to hear. Okay.
Sharing.
Yeah. Do we have our next speaker? Zbigniew? I don't see you in the list of participants. If not, then I guess we will move to our next presentation by Andrew Patterson. Andrew, are you ready?
Hello there. Yeah, I would say no, but give me a few minutes and then I will be ready, okay?
A few minutes. Oh, I will introduce you, and I'll try to
save my slides and then hide the ones which I didn't plan to share with you. So
okay.
Give me a second for that.
No, that's okay. So Andrew Patterson is an artist, researcher, cultural producer, working with developing multidisciplinary projects exploring connections between art, science, culture, ecology, and cultural heritage. And today, Andrew will offer us his presentation on Arts and Cultural Heritage Futures,
Yeah.
Orientations in Fjordsbyn, Lear and Drummond. And I first met Andrew many years ago, and I think Andrew was even my first artist that worked with soil. And to me, that was such a revelation that you can use these dirty materials as just materials to write stories about. And I think in Andrew's practice, the actual narrative, to see stories everywhere, is what is so fascinating and so interesting to me.
That's very kind of you to say, Maya. It's certainly been a wee while since that time. That was 2015.
Yes.
And yeah, I have been an old friend of RIXC and also Art Research Lab in Latvia. So it's a real pleasure to join you today. And I think you might be able to see slides. Let's see, I'll have to share my screen. Hang on a minute. So here we go. If I share my screen, let's do that. All right. I am guessing that you can see now some slides. And let's see, now you can see the background. Let's do it like, oh well, let's just look at the background, damn it. How is that? Let's see what's going on. Can you tell me, can you see a single slide or can you see the next slide? And
I see also the next slide.
oh, let's see.
And if you press the exchange button, what happens?
Oh yeah, that could work. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah. So now you can probably see this introduction page. And you can see my affiliations here. And you can also see some contacts. And in particular, there's a little sort of red hashed website, which if you want to do in the background, if you want to have in the background, open it up in your browser, let it be there on the side while I present. And this is Fjordbøn's website for a developmental project in the municipalities of Lear and Drammen, near to Oslo in Norway. And actually what I'm going to share with you today is like a 1 year report, or like a 1 year ago report, because I was kindly invited by Kristin Berghaus from Oslo Met in Oslo to come and do a short 5-day workshop with students of art and society there. And many of the students there, they are studying as a sort of occupation or vocation-led studies in arts development, curating, arts in public space. Maybe some of them wish to be artists, or maybe already are artists, or maybe they wish to do arts management and work in municipal contexts or museums or heritage contexts. Let's see. I mean, it for me was an attractive opportunity for two reasons. One, that the University of Applied Sciences in the Nordic context is a sort of applied research space, and also a place for, at least for artists like myself who are working in between disciplines, to somehow experiment a little bit about what is pedagogy and how you might do that beyond maybe this university context, and certainly in a slightly more structured space than associations, which in my case I've been involved with a lot. Let's see, so if I had to really quickly show and tell about how I describe what I do, you can see here that I emphasize processes. I recognize there's a lot of specificities like event or site or community specific. I'm very much interested in things that happen over time, that they have some sort of dialogue, that recognizes there's lots of different types of participants and different ways of working. But as Maya mentioned in the intro, that there's stories being made and the passing on of those stories happens. And this can be mediated or it can be direct. But for me anyway, doing something for 5 days is just a little part of something that could be much wider. And I like to think that what I share with you now as a sort of reflection actually pictures a little bit of story text that there is it's just something that is part of a process, and certainly just one small outcome of a longer process. And you can see here in the last sentence that I'm really interested in what's left behind, and you might see that later. So just to give some sort of again influences for me in my practice as an artist, as a researcher, as a pedagogue, I suppose, and certainly going into a workshop, I would introduce these type of things, or these are the things that I would write about if I contextualize the work. And if this presentation becomes a paper, then this is the type of background I would give. And you can see at the bottom that the context that RIXC creates through the Renewable Futures Conference and then also the Acoustic Space Journal series is very much, for me, the scene. And if we're talking inter-transdisciplinarity, then actually, if I'm honest, I like undisciplinarity, right? So this is where I'm at. And you can see the reference there that it's not hard to describe these things. Anyway, I'm also really interested in boundary objects. So if you've opened that website up and looked at the sort of urban-rural development website for a new neighborhood in about an hour away from Oslo, this was in some way a boundary object for me, to engage with the students, to think about what imagination has been made for a municipality that won't be finished until about 2030, maybe even 2050. And how do you engage with that? So this is definitely this imagination of a future municipality where maybe 12,000 people are going to live is for me the boundary object in this workshop, and then even how I present it and how I tell about it, maybe how I write about it, etc. Oh, that's a repeat. So let's look at this book now. Many of you are familiar with Acoustic Space Journal series and RIXC's endeavors and Art Research Lab's endeavors, because it's a co-production. And this one was one of the first, which was shared with Oslo Met, and you can see by the editors that Kristen Berghaus was one of them. Now, in this context, like doing artistic research or actually pedagogy with students of art and society, there was a strong focus on environmental and social sustainability. And what I hoped in my workshop process there was that I brought the social sustainability side, in particular a heritage perspective, which is a sort of extended social sense over many generations. And you can see from this quote that there is value in artists working with environment, as you're all aware, because you're also attending this type of event. But what I want to focus on in this presentation, or what I think I'm focusing on in this presentation, is the construction of narratives. So, and then also to recognize something from like a sort of archival perspective, that the arts draws upon archival material and produces materials for the future, which is based on things that are found, constructed, factual, fictive, and in a mix of what is public imaginations and what's private imaginations. And this is Hal Foster's quote from 2004. And then I could also reference Haraway. Donna Haraway here was saying that actually we have to try and mix all these things together and knot them up as they refer to try to get beyond the sort of aesthetics and also the imaginations of what could happen in the future. Okay, a little background context. I've been interested in cultural heritage for a while. This has mostly been something I have explored actually in the Latvian context together with interdisciplinary arts group CERDE, who many of you might know. And in that dialogue over maybe since 2008 in particular onwards, but renewed maybe 2015, I've been looking at cultural heritage and what is that and how might artists engage. And I have presented this in 2015 actually in similar contexts as this, where you have to keep in mind there's the tangible heritage, there's the intangible cultural heritage, there's the natural heritage, obviously, which is a focus of many artists who work with ecology. Within that, there's the biotic and the abiotic aspects to take into account. And of course, as you know, many artists and researchers in forum like this one have been taking inspiration from many of these sides of natural heritage. But what I like to emphasize and maybe to keep reintroducing this idea of a heritage cycle, where, as you can see from the flow here, that the relationships between understanding something, valuing and caring, and then of course enjoying, relates to each other and also maintains the creation of care and value within our local environments, both, well, all tangible, intangible, natural. And I'd like to think that this workshop brought that perspective to the students of art and society, and in the end, as you may see, to their field work, they're walking around the neighbourhood that is going to be the site of a future municipality of 12,000 people, and then how might you narrate that now as an imagination for the future. So just to finish this sort of intro, these are the type of roles that I'm interested in, and they all, for me, relate to each other in combination to this type of thing. Right? I think it's necessary to try and identify what roles can artists take, which can be added into the heritage cycle. So okay, so if you haven't opened up the website yet, this is what a screen grab of the front page. And it goes through a series of photographs. There's actually 4 slides, which shows the sort of typical contemporary visualization of a neighborhood that doesn't exist yet. So it's mostly visual. It's nowadays with computer graphics photorealistic, and even the nature representations, which are maybe a blend of the real ones that exist there or a simulated one with computer graphics, create an imagination of what could exist in the future. What I find often doesn't happen is an idea of, well, what will be the practices, cultures and heritage of that area, because it's focused mostly on the tangible cultural heritage, not the intangible, probably not the natural, although it's visualized certainly. Although many eco sustainability or assessments for new urban developments do have to include an appreciation, understanding of what is the natural environment, the natural heritage of the area, and how can it be conserved, protected, cared for, etc., as part of the urban planning. It was a 5-day process. I'll quickly show you the process, and then you'll see later the photographs, which will take you on the route or journey that we did with the student in 2 days fieldwork, or 2.5 days fieldwork. So, like for the pedagogical minded of you, this was the program. There was introductions, just like what I've done now. There was an idea of looking at the website. What does the website show? What doesn't it show? Just as I've explained. And then we went on a field trip. And actually, luckily, Oslo Met had hired a bus for us to go there. And then the next few days we took the train. But you can see, like, how do you prepare for field work? And these were my ideas. I mean, let's keep in mind that this took place in October 2021. For the students, it was the first in-presence physical workshop that took place during the COVID pandemic period. So it was also very casual. It was also to just get them out and together and go and do something more interesting than sit in front of a screen like we are now. So I'm thankful for that experience. It meant there wasn't a lot of pressure in assessing what we did or even producing things as a result of what we did. We were very lucky to be guided on site by Nina Guzman-Toft, who was like the local arts development officer. And when we were planning this workshop, Kristen Berghaus and I were asking, so what should we go and see there? What would be worth to go and visit? the curiosity is, if you've noticed from the subtitle, Leer och Drammen, it's actually 2 municipalities. Leer is more agricultural municipality with less people living in it. As you can see, maybe from, well, you can't see yet, you'll see when you see the photographs, there's a lot of fruit orchards, and obviously a sort of natural but industrialized agricultural environment with the sort of local services and actually an aging population too. The second day, went to visit more Leer, well, actually another part of Leer, better to say, where there was a sort of natural park area, and where the curiosity about this place was that a large industrial port terminal was being dismantled, which was private land, and the urban development is actually a private development, not necessarily a public one, but it's one of the largest in Norway at the moment. But it's private land, and so that private land was industrial. It had terminal areas for ports and shipping, but they were also reclaiming lands from the sea, and that's where the fjord burn comes from, the idea that there's a fjord city or fjord village or town, whatever, coming out of the water. And so the urban development that was to be made was actually adding to the water environment. And you'll see it's a blend imagined. Okay, so the other thing to say is that Drammen as a municipality is post-industrial, as the hint of the terminal says, and also has a sort of university type campus that has a lot of immigrants also. So what was very curious for me going into that context in a very short time and being there only for a short time was you had 2 municipalities meeting, a rural one and an urban one, and the meeting point was this new urban development, which somehow blended aspects of both. Okay, there was notes from this process. I might skip this part, but I'll very quickly go through. So there's another aspect of this, and the theoretical side that I brought to the fieldwork was archaeological. The idea that you can have, just like a sort of critical or even feminist ethnographic fieldwork, archaeologists can do the same. They can make the familiar unfamiliar. They can try to explore lost voices in an environment, and also you can draw attention to how things in the present produce the past. And what interests me also is how things in the present which produces the past and includes the past may help you imagine the future. There's a archaeological heritage theorist called Rodney Harrison from London, UCL London, who has written about the idea of surfaces and doing, instead of exploring depth metaphors, you explore the surface metaphor, what's on the surface of a particular site, which includes all the pasts and the presents together, and maybe what people might use in the future. So this is a sort of theoretical side, that you can do a surface survey rather than a sort of archaeological dig. And that might be a more useful metaphor for exploring archaeological thinking. And then there's also the idea that, which is quite a common idea, that palimpsests, which includes many pasts, within them have potential futures. And that side of things may be connected with imaginations of future science fiction, even memes like solar punk could be a way to imagine possible futures that don't exist yet. And Maya, who referred to this workshop way back in 2015, Soils, we in that process tried to mix together the presents, the past, the futures. And these things together can actually be something which gives you new ideas and new potentials of what to do at a particular site. Okay, well, this is maybe one last thing on this theoretical side, that the quote or the highlighted part at the bottom, that it may be possible to do rescue archaeology of the contemporary life, and that might help address what could be future gaps in knowledge. So where the things of our contemporary life might be forgotten, means that we'll have a loss in the future when we look at our heritage of the current times we're living now. And that's something we have to be aware of and maybe consider, like what's being destroyed now and what do we want to maintain and keep. Okay, let's see. I'll very quickly go through this. So just imagine that you're walking with the group of students. I'm not going to explain the pictures, I'm just going to go through them because I want to read you a little text at the end. But this is anyway at the moment in Drammen, and well, I am going to explain a little bit, I'll narrate a little bit. So a feature of Drammen is that there's this sort of local large-scale hospital, which is what you can see in the background. And a new hospital is going to be made at the new meeting point between the rural and the urban municipalities. These are pictures from the rural side. This is a local sort of shopping mall, library, social centre in Lear municipality, the rural part. And here is also an info point in the library about where's the new development, what's the new development going to look like. And when I said that there's going to be land reclamation, you can see here from the modelling, we had a sort of description from Nina Toft, who works for the local municipality to try and imagine art projects in the area, and trying to imagine that there might be this type of new development in that area that you've just seen pictures of. Quite a large development, has to be said, and actually the largest, as I said before, in Norway at the moment. So we did the walking tour. We saw some heritage sites. This was an old medieval farm, which had quite a famous story, a saint story from the area. It was an old Viking area, and had a history of trading internationally. There was a famous character called St. Halvard, who became a saint, for example. And there was also things to visit, like this organic shop, which sold local produce. And there was a very particular spot that Nina took us to, which was an old building that had just been purchased by Lear municipality as a future cultural centre, potential cultural centre. And we were there imagining what could happen here, and we walked around this old building which hadn't yet been renovated. What could happen here in the future? And this caught my imagination. And this is actually what I hope the students would also think about, because when we were walking around, I was asking them to think about what's already there, what type of cultural heritages are there, tangible and intangible, what sort of nature is there, both biotic and abiotic, what might be still appreciated in the future, and what could exist in the future, and how might you as future arts workers in the area, what might you do? So anyway, this building caught a lot of people's imagination. We walked around the other areas. We went to a bird sanctuary area, a sort of nature park nearby, as you can see from our walk. And we also saw from the next day the site of the new hospital that's going to be built, replacing the other one. And you can see it quite soon, 2025. The imaginations and the visualizations of the future at site on present was already there, but not what people might do there beyond work in a hospital, or be cared for in a hospital, or live in those buildings, other than the visualizations that existed. You've got to remember that it wouldn't be complete, the whole neighborhood, until 2030, but more likely 2050. What happens and what would exist in 2050? This was the real challenge of that workshop process, and for all of us there to try and think, what's maybe like in 30 years? It's not an imagination that we can really deal with so easily. And this is all we saw. Empty sites, reclaimed sites, water being pumped out of industrial sites. And of course, there are people already living there in Drammen. And this particular sort of almost like do-it-yourself fanzine board, collage board underneath one bridge in Drammen caught my imagination. And it made me think about how can we tell stories also in the future? And what I'd asked the students to do, which unfortunately only a couple of the group did do, was to try and write a story about something that will exist in the future there, like an actual cultural event or cultural activity. So that is something that I think I will stop sharing the slides now, because I'd like to read you a little bit of the text, because I've explained the process. And what I will do is I will, yeah, I'll tell you a few sentences about what a few of the students did, and then I'll read you the example that I wrote for them to help them understand what to do. So the majority of what I tell you now is actually my writing, not their writing, okay? Because we didn't really get that far. So let's see, 5 days is not a long time, just to say. So excuse me if my eyes go into a different direction, because I have the text in front of me here, so it's going to be more like a reading. Let's see if I can move it across my screen. Yeah, I can. Okay. So when the students were asked to imagine archaeologies of and in the present, as proposed by the archaeology and heritage theorist Rodney Harrison, something to be found in advance, a survey which contains pasts, presents, and possible futures. One student imagined deliberative councils formed on a 5-year process to map and consider human and non-human relations. Another imagined a seasonal farmers market and the St. Halvard themed art and crafts fair. For those of you who know Serde and Ijsputte, then maybe something like the Rabeloshana art and craft market. Another imagined an artist residency program for 6 to 8 persons with a work exchange, caring for the building and surrounding land. The store Gilhusgård, this large wooden building that Nina Toft explained to us and showed us that I told you about, became a centre for these imaginations. And another student imagined youth work already happening next year, so this year. Maybe they're already doing it now, I don't know. So for me, these were transgenerational potentials. And it was and is our potential as artists and researchers and pedagogues to keep imagining them and prefiguring those imaginations to support the communities who already live there and may do so in the future. So I'll read my example narrative to them. So this was somehow a little bit more elaborated and more maybe what I had in mind that may come out of a process like this, and maybe also might be creative writing that you could do to imagine future things that don't exist yet. And as cultural workers or artists who may or do social engaged work and want to work in society and make events for that situation and context, then you're always having to make proposals about what you'd like to do, especially for funders if you want funding. And but it's maybe not often you fabricate them, that you include things that don't exist yet, things that might happen, it might possibly happen, it might not. So this is a different type of future writing than art grant proposal writing, where you hopefully get the money to do what you said you're going to do. This is a little bit different. It's more, it's a possible future, it doesn't have to happen, but it maybe helps inspire people to imagine something. So I'll read this, excuse me if it's, if my eyes look in a different direction because it's on another screen. The store Gilhusgård courtyard is lined with people, appropriately enough for a place named in Old Norwegian, for a place where people gather together. It's been a cultural residential centre and local scene for the commune since it was purchased in 2021 during the first global corona pandemic. The audience was waiting for the performances to begin. It's the 15th year of autumn dance festivals. For the first 10 years, it took place annually on the 3rd Friday of October, but for the past 5 years, it had to be moved into November as the leaves were dropping later and later. Of course, it's not getting any lighter then, only darker. So it's adjusted from an early evening festivity into a late afternoon one. People are only working 3.5 days per week nowadays. Association dance groups have been invited from around the Oslo region, and also a few international groups air-blipped in from Scotland and Iceland. Viking sea routes revived. The millennial-old cultural and trading networks continue, but many groups opt for slow air travel rather than sea travel. Seasickness is still a thing. In fact, the winds are stronger. Anyhow, many of the people present are families and friends of the local tango group who perform each year. Immigrants to the Fjordbjorn area from Oslo brought more social dancers to the area, but the Union Tango group in Drammen have been around for decades. The elders in the dance group even traveled to Argentina in their youth when it was still easy without guilt to fly across the hemispheres. It's their shuffling feet in the leaves that bring a smile to the audience. Each year they start the proceedings together with a full orchestra tipica ensemble, 2 violins, flute, piano, double bass, and at least 2 bandoneons, the accordion-like instrument closely associated with tango. Feet shuffle and kick up the leaves as the dancers move around the gravel area of the yard. Leaves left on purpose, aspen, birch, and oak leaves, yellow, brown, pushed around to the sound of zigzags through the air. Later, other contemporary sound dance groups leave traces in different directions, while the drone cameras record from above. What would the old Drammen municipality park and garden keepers think of it all? Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. And thank you for the story. And I hear in the story some parts that writers use to write, when we write as if it's in the future, like seasickness is still a thing. Like you would never say that about something living today. And so some parts of that writing are kind of imagining the future people. And when you imagine future people, have you ever thought about also how the maybe qualities of the person might change? Maybe like what's we value, like leaves in autumn, just like in 30 years future, would that still be an important part of our culture?
It's a good question, Maya. I mean, you're right. I mean, trying to write about the future and keep it realistic and keep it based and grounded in some sort of reality, some potential reality which could exist. Like there's no point writing about something that can't exist if you have an activist cause, right? Because, okay, you can create a new, I mean, okay, that's contentious to say this, but you can create a future imagination, but make it possible. Quite realistically possible. Almost all of what I read at the end there is possible, maybe other than the air blip travel, right? But that's a little bit of science fiction. People did imagine to have air travel, and some science fiction writers do refer to that. For example, is it Kim Anderson? I can't remember, but Ministries of the Futures, or Ministries of Tomorrow, yeah, Ministries of the Future, referred to this as in 20-30 years as being a way that people might do slow travel instead of fast travel. So they could appreciate, they could look down from the mode of transport in a slow way and appreciate what's there. At the same time, maybe referring to drones in the sky, potentially recording the dancing that was happening locally, is something that exists now, but why it's there may be different in 20-30 years. And what it's been done, why is it being recorded, is something that might be questionable. It was possible. I mean, it was only short text, and the idea was for the students to only write a short text, so you couldn't get into much depth about values. But after doing this work, just recently in Valmiera, the Latvian Contemporary Art Centre summer school, which themed post-socialist ecologies, I wrote a much longer text based on a similar idea, a cultural producer describing what's happened in the future, like maybe an event they organized or maybe they were responsible for or attended. And the point of that was to write a much longer text where you could start to discuss what you hope might be the local economics, not just a quick throwaway reference like 3.5 days a week work, but actually get into, well, how would you describe that area if, in the case that I wrote recently, if you took on board bioregionalism seriously in the Baltic states, how would you describe the area? Would you still, in that case, Valmiera, would you still call that area Bidzeme, or would you call it Gallia bioregion? And that starts to get into value systems, or if you focus not on a site but a particular plant, as it did, what would you use that plant for, and what challenges might the focus on that plant as a local value? I mean, in Aisputu, 20 years ago, it was an apple or apples. But if you choose another plant now that's abundant or surplus, is that plant still going to be there in 20 years? These are interesting questions, you know, and we are speculating, of course, what the future is like, but it doesn't mean, just like many science fiction writers at the moment, doesn't mean that you can't project even into next week or into the next decade or even longer, further away, what you hope will be, so that people's imagination might be stirred to think, oh, that's possible. That's where the possible futures are.
Yeah, that's that was kind of my my thoughts. That the text that we can offer as a future vision is it has to be quite trivial so people can relate to it, and then we throw in some futuristic ideas in there inside the something that is not that futuristic. It's very, very current, or maybe like 5 years into future. So yeah, so it's a kind of this developing that perspective from a future person living in that state. So it's very, very challenging, I think.
It is. I mean, I know the work that you do, Maya, and I guess the other fellows and colleagues in this room and situation. Like we're all struggling to come up with something which could be imagined as sustainable, is possible, it doesn't make things worse, as in relation to the previous presentation. Like, okay, it's great to promote new technologies and developments in relation to natural or ecosystems which we are part of, but how can we make it less of a problem, that engagement, than it is now, and not add to the problem? And yeah, this is the biggest challenge with this future imaginations, because I agree with you wholeheartedly that we have to try our best to imagine and design for those who are designers things which are reducing our impact, in fact, almost creating a positive acceleration of change, you know, positive feedback into the situation, which makes things better. Maybe that's actually a negative feedback from the use of technologies and minerals and materials and things like this. So so that what we do as artists, designers, cultural workers, etc., is to be very conscious of our imaginations and what effect they might have.
Yeah, that's it really goes back to previous presentation. That was such a imagination into non-existing technologies. Well, your future was very down to earth, very kind of.
Yeah, I mean there are a number of creative writers at the moment who are writers. Not, I mean, I'm just using writing as a means to communicate what I've done, but like in practice in somewhere, or in field work. But like the genre of climate fiction, which is looking at, for example, how the our lived experience now, as it will be affected by the climate crisis or the loss of biodiversity, has to be grounded in our everyday life, so that we get a recognition that it is our everyday lives that are going to be affected. And of course, science fiction of a more technological, even fantasizing way has a very good role also. It can help create parallel imaginations where any futures is suppressed, right? And you need to go into fantasy to discuss utopian or even anarchistic ideas about how we should make society better, so it's maybe useful that it's in a sort of parallel world of future, which is not as recognizable as our own. That's a long trope in science fiction too. But the current writing, which is dealing, for example, with the climate crisis, is really trying to ground us and make it so recognizable that we're scared into action even. And I find that very interesting. I recently came, when I visited Scotland a few weeks ago, and where I come from, and I was hunting down Scottish science fiction. So in other words, written in Scots, or written about neighbourhoods such as where I grew up in central Scotland, like small town, post-industrial Scotland, science fiction based in those, with characters who you might recognise. And I think that's really important too, that whether it's utopian or dystopian imaginations of the future, that they're really in your face, our lives. I think it's very, very useful.
Thank you for sharing. Do we maybe have a question from the audience? If there are no questions, then I have another discussion point for Andrew. You showed us the images of the future projections. This is going to be built here sometime in the future. And the most progress, or the progressive part, is kind of the buildings. But even the buildings are quite basic. Like, is there even a kind of a thought about something, how the city is going to be a more futuristic, or is it really just kind of the best practices of what is actually happening today?
That's a good question. I think that's a challenge for all urban planning developments, right? And I first had a hint of this, or an imagination of this, about 20 years ago, when I did my master's studies in Middlesbrough, Northeast England. And I studied computer graphics, virtual environments, and graduated in 2001. And one of the first projects I had after that was in the local virtual reality center. And that virtual reality center main income as a unit of the University of Teesside was to help imagine urban developments, or to imagine future urban developments in the area. And it made me realize that the visualization process for urban development has to be a big scale, and virtual modeling of those, such as the graphics images you saw in my slides or in that website, but also what I saw 20 years ago with slightly less photorealism, but essentially the same thing. It's a dehumanizing process that almost never includes pictures of people who are living, moving, just like all architectural modeling hardly shows moving images, just because it's expensive to add that in. It's maybe different nowadays because there's so much virtual model libraries and even motion capture libraries and things like this that you probably could populate and make a living model of the built urban environment that has to be invested in. And that's the thing, a lot of money has to be placed on that future visualization and imagination for it to happen. And the virtual models are always clean. They never show dirt. They never show the less desirable aspects of society, because no one's going to fund that. That's why it's always clean and looks good. And that was the case 20 years ago in Middlesbrough, and it's the case now in Drammen and Lear. No one is going to invest hundreds of millions of euros or kroner or pounds into urban developments which look like a thing which is unrecognizable, or looks like the shitty, scruffy town that's reality. And I find that really interesting, because if you are interested in the visual solar punk meme that goes around Instagram, for example, at the moment, which I find fascinating, just as a meme at least. And when I prepared for that workshop, I did read about solar punk as a genre, because it's a brilliant creative space for putting together and mashing together so many different things that we can relate to and appreciate: appropriate technology, art and ecology, sustainable social reproduction, etc. Right? But they've tried to put all those things together into one umbrella term, so that you can get inspired by many different disciplines and many different types of people and practitioners, many different places. But many of the visualizations are fantastical. They're not anything like our reality. And of course, there's going to be always the showboat urban developments which do have living walls and lattice structures which allow an ecological lifestyle at your window, etc. Right? There's always going to be that. But at the bottom line, there's economics behind building anything. And the ones who give the money over have to know it's going to work. It has to fit into the local climate environment as they imagine it at the moment, or as they imagine it in a couple of years, or 20 years, or 30 years. And in the case of this Fjordborn project, which I find fascinating, is that they probably had to start developing the visual imagination of that project about 5 years ago, to present it last year, which we saw to inspire anyone, like, let's say artists, just who that student artists and cultural producers of the future, to think about wanting to be involved. And it has to be familiar. Otherwise, where do you start? Once you know already, where do you start? And I think that's a really part of the complexity that has existed when virtual modeling and computer graphics have been used in imagining future urban or even rural spaces. Now the visualization technologies are better.
I was at least looking forward to some rooftop gardens or some solar panels, just
exactly.
anything. But because it really looks so generic.
You're right. I totally agree with you. I was just as critical, and some of the students also in the group, they were like, "This is so lame." It's supposedly the biggest urban development in Norway, and it just looks like what we've already got, and it's not going to be ready in 30 years. I mean,
yes.
So yeah, I agree. Maybe the imagination put into the modeling and the visualization at the stage where they have to make the models wasn't invested in. But one of the arguments that Nina Toth was making, and Kristen Berghaus was backing up by getting our students to get involved with that place, is that you have to start already now. You should have really started 5 years ago, but there wasn't the position that Nina Toth had existing to facilitate any cultural workers or artists learning about the area, or commissioning artists and residents to explore one aspect of things. Like when we were there in the local library at the display area for that urban development or rural urban development project, there was a commissioned artist residence work, which explored, you'll like this, Maya, vertical gardening and hydroponics. I mean, arguably it's not rocket science, right? And you know that. It's complicated maybe to do at scale, But getting people inspired in such things at the moment is just mirroring the agricultural industry that's 1 hour away in mass greenhouses doing hydroponics. And so how can you do that creatively? What does it mean to do that creatively when it's already existing as an industrial scale hydroponic system nearby?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, but the argument, again, just going back, just to reiterate, is that you have to already start now. And that's at least visionary. So even if the neighborhood is not going to exist for 30 years, you already need to start now, getting people involved, creative people involved. So I do value and appreciate that. It's just a pity that the visualizations are so lame at the moment, just so normal. But then there's a chance that in 5 years, it might be better. There might be a second version, number 2, and the visualizations go out and that website's updated and other people get inspired. I don't know.
So it's kind of offering a blank page for your imagination.
Maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, just your response suggests that there's work to do, and it's maybe necessary to be involved. And I like to think that's why the felt group, and which is the context of our gathering today, and the collaboration between the partners involved in this festival conference event is the right group of people to get together to help add to those early visualizations of a sustainable ecological community of the future. I mean, fingers crossed, right?
We have a comment in the chat that art is not buying hydroponic systems, but to make it from waste. That that really is that's my whole research. When 7 years of working,
yes,
is how to make how to convince people that hydroponics is very, very cool.
You do a good job.
I try, but I think we can also end our discussion today and continue in November.
Thanks so much, Maya, for your questions and comments. Thanks everyone for listening, and I appreciate the time and space we've had.
Yes, so for people in online, we can probably return to the main room and or join the second panel that might be still in session. And we are finishing here today. Thank you for listening, and let's keep in touch.